Part 1. Alistair Grant had always walked through life as if every hallway, every room, and every conversation belonged to him. People often said he didn't just enter a place, he occupied it. His mansion, stretching across a wide hill at the edge of the city, reflected that same personality. Tall glass windows, polished floors, and an atmosphere that made visitors stand a little straighter as soon as they stepped inside. Everything about the home spoke of wealth, success, and a man who expected perfection from whoever crossed his path. To the outside world, Alistair was a symbol of accomplishment. He owned a chain of hotels, invested in technology firms, and donated large amounts to music foundations. But behind closed doors, his love for music wasn't as gentle as people imagined. He saw it as a mark of culture, something elite, something that separated people like him from people who just lived ordinary lives. His grand piano in the center of his living room was almost like a trophy. He rarely played it, but he never missed a chance to talk about it. Maria had been working in his mansion for only a few weeks. She was quiet, careful, and always moved with a kind of softness that the house had never seen before. When she cleaned, she hummed under her breath, almost too lightly for anyone to notice. When she served tea, she kept her eyes lowered, speaking only when necessary. Unlike some of the other staff, she didn't rush or chatter. She simply did her work and disappeared into the background. But people noticed the ones who try not to be noticed. One afternoon, while the sun spilled through the tall windows, two of the senior staff, Grace, the cook, and Leonard, the driver, were chatting quietly in the kitchen as Maria washed fruit at the sink. They spoke in hushed voices, thinking no one else was around. "I heard she used to study music," Grace said, lowering her voice just enough to sound secretive. "Not just casual lessons. Real training. Piano, I think." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? She doesn't look like someone who had time for that. She works 3 jobs now. That's why it surprised me," Grace continued. "Apparently she was very good. One of those students who always won competitions." Maria kept her head down, pretending she wasn't listening. She hoped the conversation would drift away, but instead lingered like a spotlight, slowly turning in her direction. Leonard folded his arms. "Then why is she doing this now?" Grace sighed softly. "Life hits people differently. I heard her family had problems, money, health. A lot. She had to give up school. Poor girl." Maria's hands froze for just a moment. A faint, uncomfortable ache rose in her chest. She didn't want anyone discussing her past. She didn't like the attention, and she didn't want anyone imagining her as someone to feel sorry for. She preferred silence. Silence felt safe. What she didn't know was that Alistair had stopped by the doorway behind her and heard most of the conversation. At first, he felt amused. A maid with a musical background? It sounded like one of those stories people made up to pass time. He glanced at Maria's back, small, humble, unassuming. She didn't carry herself like someone who had ever been on a stage or studied under professionals. To him, the idea didn't fit. And when something didn't fit his idea of the world, he dismissed it as nonsense. He stepped quietly away before anyone noticed him listening. Later that evening, he sat in his private lounge, sipping a strong espresso while thinking about what he'd overheard. The story bothered him, not because he cared, but because he disliked the feeling that others believed something he considered unrealistic. The staff had become unusually admiring of her, whispering about her past like it was some hidden treasure. That annoyed him. He didn't like anything happening in his house that he didn't control. "She's probably pretending to be something she's not," he muttered under his breath, leaning back into the leather chair. "People do that to earn sympathy." He glanced at the grand piano in the living room. Its polished black surface reflected the lights above, shining as if waiting for attention. A small smirk crept across his face, If she's as talented as they say, he said to himself, she wouldn't mind showing it. The next morning, Maria arrived early, just as she always did. She had a routine wipe down the counters, start the laundry, organize the dining area, then move toward the living room. She carried a small cloth and a gentle cleaning spray, preparing to polish the shelves before the mansion's owner woke up. But today, Alistair was already there. He stood by the piano, running his fingers lightly along its edge. His expression looked calm, almost too calm, which made Maria pause before stepping fully inside. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied without turning around. "You finished the kitchen?" "Yes, sir. Good." He tapped the piano once, a sharp, deliberate sound. "I heard something interesting yesterday." Her stomach tightened. She had a guess, and she hoped she was wrong. "I heard," he continued, still avoiding eye contact, "that you know how to play the piano." She gripped the cloth in her hands. "A little," she answered politely. "Not much, not much?" He finally looked at her, raising a skeptical eyebrow. The staff seemed to think otherwise. Maria didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to lie, but she didn't want to explain her past either. It felt personal, something she had left behind for a reason. "I studied it when I was younger," she admitted quietly. "That was a long time ago." Alistair stepped aside, revealing the piano bench as if presenting a stage. "Why don't you show me?" Her breath caught. "Sir, I'm working. I have to finish." "Consider this part of your work," he interrupted. "I want to hear it." "Go on." There was an edge in his voice, not anger, but a challenge. He didn't ask. He commanded. Maria stared at the piano. Her heart thumped harder. She hadn't played in years. Her hands, once so familiar with the keys, now felt foreign even thinking about it. She had always avoided pianos since leaving school, because every note reminded her of the dream she had been forced to let go. "I don't think," she began softly. "Are you refusing?" Alistair asked, and though he said it calmly, the weight of those words pressed on her. She took a slow breath. "No, sir." She set her cleaning cloth aside and walked toward the bench. Her steps felt heavier with each movement, like the room had suddenly stretched farther than its walls allowed. As she sat down, she kept her eyes lowered, afraid of meeting his gaze, afraid of what this moment would stir inside her, afraid of disappointing him, embarrassing herself, or resurfacing the pain she kept buried. Alistair crossed his arms and leaned against the side table, ready to witness her failure, or at least what he expected to be a clumsy attempt. But Maria's hesitation wasn't from lack of skill. It came from the weight of memories she tried to forget. Her fingers hovered above the keys, barely touching them. She felt the cold surface, smooth and familiar enough to send a small shiver up her arms. Behind her, she sensed Alistair's impatience building. "Well?" he asked. "Any time." She closed her eyes for a split second, not to focus, but to gather the courage to face something she thought she had lost forever. She pressed the first key. Just one. A soft, shaky note filled the room. Alistair almost laughed. Just as he suspected. This was going to be easy to disprove. Maria exhaled slowly and placed both hands on the keys. She wanted to stop. She wanted to stand up and walk away. But something deep inside, something she had hidden for years, gently pushed her onward. And so, despite her trembling hands and racing heart, she let the second note follow, and the third, and before she knew it, the room was no longer just a cold space filled with expensive furniture. It became something else, warmer, heavier, filled with the stir of a past she wasn't ready to face, but couldn't escape. Alistair frowned. It wasn't good, yet not impressive, not terrible. But something in her posture, the way her shoulders relaxed with each note, made him pause. He leaned slightly forward. Maybe this wouldn't just be a moment of embarrassment. Maybe it would reveal something more. Maria didn't know it yet. But the simple act of pressing those keys would change everything, her place in that mansion, the way Alistair viewed her, and the path she had carefully tucked away in her heart. And it all started with a challenge she never wanted, and a piano she thought she would never touch again. Part 2. Maria stayed seated at the piano longer than she expected, even after the last soft note faded into the quiet room. She didn't play a full song, only a few uncertain lines that drifted between memory and hesitation. She felt exposed, as if she had opened a small door to a part of herself she kept tightly closed for years. Her breath was uneven, and she wasn't sure if the trembling in her hands came from nerves or something deeper. Alistair, who had watched her with a mixture of doubt and curiosity, gave a slow exhale. He hadn't expected much, but even the little she played didn't match the clumsy attempt he had been waiting for. The notes were shaky, yes, but they had something beneath them, something he couldn't quite name. And that bothered him. He liked things clear, defined, and measurable. This tiny glimpse of talent didn't give him enough proof to judge her. It only made him more curious. But curiosity could be dangerous when mixed with pride. Maria quickly moved her hands away from the keys and stood up. "May I finish the living room now?" she asked quietly, her voice soft but steady. "Yes," Alistair replied, though he seemed far from done with the subject. "Go ahead." She nodded and walked toward the shelves she was supposed to clean earlier. Her movements returned to their usual quiet rhythm, but there was a small stiffness in her shoulders. She didn't want to play. She didn't want anyone looking at her that way, like she was some mystery that needed to be uncovered. Alistair watched her for another moment before leaving the room. He didn't thank her. He didn't comment. But his expression had changed, and even if Maria didn't notice, the house itself seemed to sense a shift. Something had been stirred. Later that day, the mansion buzzed with more activity than usual. A dinner gathering was scheduled for that evening. Not one of those massive parties Alistair hosted twice a year, but a small event with a handful of investors and a couple of old acquaintances. These gatherings were quieter, but far more important to him. Business was always mixed into the air, even if the guests pretended they were simply there to enjoy a good meal. Maria moved between rooms preparing things. She carried plates with careful hands, straightened cushions, polished glasses until they shined, and checked the candles arranged on the long dining table. She worked the way she always did, with calm respect and a kind of gentle presence that made the house feel less like a cold museum. But today, she felt something different in the air. A strange tension, like a thread stretched too tight. She didn't know why, but she sensed that the morning moment at the piano wasn't finished. It hovered in her mind, tapping at her thoughts no matter how much she tried to focus on work. Grace noticed her quietness. "You all right?" she asked while arranging bread on a silver tray. "Yes," Maria replied with a small smile. "Just a little tired." Grace didn't push further, but her eyes showed understanding. She had worked in that mansion long enough to recognize when something weighed on someone. Evening arrived with warm lights and the soft scent of roasted herbs drifting through the air. The guests began to arrive one by one, welcomed by the formal staff, and led to the elegant seating area. Maria kept her distance as usual, serving drinks and making sure everything ran smoothly. She kept her gaze low, never interrupting conversations, never lingering longer than needed. Alistair, dressed in his sharp suit, moved between his guests with practiced charm. He laughed at the right moments, nodded respectfully, and spoke with confidence about business matters and travel stories. But every now and then his eyes drifted toward Maria as she passed by, and each time she noticed, she felt her stomach twist. She knew that look. It wasn't unkind or cruel, But it was the gaze of a man who had questions, and Maria had never liked being the answer dot as dinner began. She stood by the wall with the other staff, ready to serve each course. The guests talked freely. One of them, a man with silver hair and a booming laugh, admired the large piano near the corner. "You still haven't sold that beauty?" he said, pointing with his fork. "I thought you said you wanted a newer model." Alistair chuckled. "I did consider it, but it carries too much history. Besides, it impresses people." The silver-haired man smirked. "Well, I suppose it does. Anyone among us still knows how to play. Or is it just decoration now?" The guests laughed. Maria listened silently and hoped the conversation would drift elsewhere. But fate, it seemed, had its own timing. Alistair tapped his glass lightly. "Actually," he said, his voice carrying across the table, "we have someone in the house who knows how to play." Maria's chest tightened instantly. Her breath caught, her pulse jumped. She glanced up, and sure enough, every pair of eyes at the table slowly turned toward her. The other staff members shifted quietly, sensing where this was going. Alistair looked straight at her. "Maria, come here for a moment." Her feet felt rooted to the floor. She whispered to Grace, "Do I have to?" Grace gave her a sympathetic look. "He asked, dear." Maria stepped forward slowly, stopping near the edge of the dining table. She kept her hands folded in front of her, hoping the moment would be brief. "This young woman," Alistair said with a slight smile, "has a background in piano. Quite an interesting one, from what I've been told." Maria wished she could disappear. She wished she could melt into the floor or become invisible. I only studied a little when I was younger," she said softly. Trying to keep her tone steady, one of the ladies at the table tilted her head. "Oh, that's wonderful. Could you play something for us?" "We would love to hear." Maria shook her head gently. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I haven't practiced in a long time." "Oh, come now," the silver-haired man said with a friendly laugh. "It's a casual gathering. Just a little tune." But for Maria, it wasn't casual at all. It was a door she wasn't prepared to open again, especially not in front of strangers. Alistair stepped in before she could respond. "It's fine," he said lightly. "She can manage." "Maria, take a seat at the piano." Her heart dropped. The room felt smaller suddenly, and the air seemed heavier. "Sir," she said quietly. "I really don't think," he spoke over her, his tone smooth but firm. "Maria." Just her name, spoken clearly, as if he were gently reminding her of her place. She swallowed hard. The staff watching from the sidelines couldn't help looking worried, but no one dared interfere. With slow steps, she walked toward the piano. The soft hum of conversation faded behind her. She reached out and touched the piano bench, trying to steady herself before sitting down. Her hands felt cold, her breathing uneven. The room behind her had fallen completely silent. Everyone waited. Alistair stood near the table, arms crossed loosely, looking almost casual, but his eyes were sharp, measuring. He wanted to see whether the morning's impression had been a fluke or if there was something real beneath it. Maria sat and let her fingers hover over the keys again. But this time, the pressure was far heavier. The morning had been uncomfortable, yes, but private. This was different. This was a stage she hadn't asked for, with strangers watching, expecting, judging. She pressed a single key. A soft note echoed, gentle but shaky. It almost seemed to tremble through the air. Some guests smiled politely. Others leaned forward with interest. They didn't know her story. They didn't know the weight behind her hesitation. To them, she was just a maid being sweet and shy. But to Maria, that single note unlocked memories. She didn't want to relive her music teacher's proud smile, the long hours practicing after school, the competitions she had won. the shelves once filled with medals that had probably gathered dust by now. And then the sudden collapse of it all the day, she realized she couldn't continue. No matter how much she loved it. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she took a breath, and she began to play. Not confidently, not at first. Her hands trembled, her rhythm uncertain. The melody she chose was simple, far simpler than anything she once mastered. But there was something warm beneath the shaky surface. Something honest. The guests went quiet, not out of wonder, but out of polite curiosity. The notes filled the room, soft and uneven, like someone trying to remember a language they once spoke fluently. Alistair tilted his head slightly. He wasn't impressed yet, but he wasn't disappointed either. There was something familiar, something genuine, something that made him lean forward without realizing it. Maria continued, letting the melody guide her. It wasn't perfect, but it wasn't meant to be. It was a piece from her childhood, one she used to play on calm afternoons, when life felt simple and full of possibility. Her shoulders relaxed little by little. Her breathing steadied, and for a moment, just a small moment, she forgot the room behind her. She forgot the pressure. She forgot Alistair's sharp gaze. She played like she used to, for herself, for the memory of who she had been. When the last note drifted into silence, she didn't turn around immediately. She kept her hands on the keys, feeling the warmth beneath her fingertips. Then she slowly stood up. The guests clapped politely, not loudly, not enthusiastically, but enough to show appreciation. They smiled kindly, though most of them didn't truly understand the deeper story behind her playing. Maria bowed her head slightly in thanks. Very nice, one guest commented. Quite charming. Yes, lovely, another added. Alistair didn't clap. He simply watched her with an unreadable expression. Maria stepped back, hoping the moment was finally over. She wanted to return to the background, to the quiet places where no one asked her to be anything more than what she was. Part 3. The night after the dinner gathering, the mansion settled into silence, but Maria couldn't sleep. She lay awake on her small bed in the staff quarters, staring at the ceiling as thoughts ran through her mind in confused circles. Playing in front of those guests had stirred something she wasn't ready to deal with. She tried telling herself it didn't matter, that it had only been a few shaky notes, nothing important. But the feeling inside her said otherwise. It wasn't embarrassment that kept her awake. It wasn't fear either. It was something far more complicated, like the sound of a door opening somewhere behind her, even though she had no intention of walking through it. The truth was simple. For a brief moment, she had felt alive again. She had felt like herself, the version she had packed away years ago. And that scared her more than anything. While she tossed under her blanket, another part of the mansion was quiet, but far from calm. In his study, Alistair sat in a large chair with a glass of water in hand, tapping his fingers slowly against the wooden armrest. He wasn't upset or angry, he was puzzled. Maria's playing had been shaky and far from remarkable, but there had been a hidden quality to it that he couldn't ignore. He thought about talent often. He thought about how rare it truly was, and how some people spent their whole lives chasing it, while others discovered it by accident. Maria didn't seem like someone chasing anything. She looked more like someone hiding, and Alistair had never been good at letting things remain hidden. He replayed the melody she had played earlier in the evening. It had been simple, almost childlike, but not in a childish way. It was more like a memory turned into sound. He didn't know why it stuck with him, but it did, and in a strange way, it bothered him. Why did the staff make it sound like she was some prodigy? He muttered to himself. What's the real story? He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Something told him he hadn't seen the full picture, and that thought made him even more curious. The next morning, Maria woke early, as she always did. She forced herself out of bed, washed her face, and tied her hair neatly before heading to the kitchen. She wanted to pretend everything was normal. She wanted to blend into the background the way she always did. But as soon as she entered the kitchen, she noticed Grace giving her a long, knowing look. "You all right, dear?" Grace asked, her voice gentle. "Yes," Maria answered. Almost too quickly, Grace handed her a basket of freshly washed herbs. "You did well last night." Everyone thought it was lovely. Maria smiled politely, but her expression didn't reach her eyes. "I just played something small. That's what made it nice," Grace said. It felt real. Maria didn't know how to respond. She nodded and went to prepare the tray for breakfast service. A few moments later, Leonard walked in, rubbing his arms from the morning chill. "Good morning," he greeted. Then he eyed Maria with a grin. "So, piano star, huh? I didn't know you had it in you." Maria shook her head quickly. "Please don't call me that." Leonard chuckled. "Fine, fine." But the guests liked it. Even the boss looked surprised. And that was exactly the problem. Maria didn't want Alistair paying attention to her. She didn't want him curious or impressed or anything close to that. She wanted to do her job and leave quietly when her shift ended. "Nothing more. Let's just forget about it," she said, her voice small. "It was only for last night." Grace and Leonard exchanged a look, but neither of them pushed further. When Maria carried the breakfast tray toward the dining room, she braced herself. She hoped Alistair would be in one of his silent moods. She hoped he wouldn't mention the piano. She hoped he wouldn't even look at her. But when she entered, he was already sitting at the table, reading something on his tablet. The room was bright with morning light, reflecting off the polished furniture. Maria placed the tray in front of him gently. "Good morning," she said quietly. "Good morning," he replied. Without looking up, she turned to leave, but halfway across the room, he suddenly spoke again. "You played better than I expected." She froze. He put the tablet down and looked at her. "You said you hadn't practiced in years." "I haven't," she said softly. "Well," he replied, "you haven't forgotten as much as you think." His voice wasn't cold or harsh, but it held something else in interest she didn't want. "Thank you." "Sir," she whispered. "Come here for a moment," he said. She turned slowly. Unsure of what he wanted, he gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." She hesitated. Sitting across from the mansion owner casually felt wrong. Staff didn't sit at the same table. It wasn't the way things were done. "Don't worry," he said. "I'm not asking you to join me for breakfast. I just want to talk." After a moment of silent debate, she sat down carefully, her hands neatly placed on her lap. "I want to understand something," he said. "When exactly did you stop playing?" Maria looked down. "Years ago." "And why?" She shook her head. "It's complicated." "I'm sure it is," he replied. "But complicated doesn't mean unimportant." She didn't answer. His voice softened slightly. "The staff mentioned something about your family. You don't have to tell me anything personal, but I want to know one thing. Were you taught professionally?" Maria hesitated before nodding once. "And you left that behind because—" Her breath caught. She wasn't ready to unwrap the past. "Not here. Not with him. It doesn't matter anymore," she said. "Life changed. I had responsibilities." Alistair watched her face closely, looking for clues, looking for cracks. He wasn't trying to be cruel. He simply wanted clarity. But Maria felt as if her heart was a box he was trying to pry open. He leaned back. "Play something again later today." Her eyes widened. "Sir, I'm not asking for a performance," he said. "I just want to see something." "Please," she said softly. "I'd prefer not to." He studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm not forcing you this time." His tone slowed. "But I think there's more in you than you want to admit." Maria didn't know what to say. She simply nodded, stood up, and excused herself. As she walked out, she felt unsteady. Alistair wasn't mocking her. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't even trying to embarrass her. And somehow, that scared her even more. He was curious. He was interested. And she knew that when someone like him became interested, things changed, and she wasn't ready for change. The hours passed quietly, but Maria couldn't stay calm. Every room she cleaned, every chore she finished, her mind returned to the same place. The piano, the melody, her past, his voice. I think there's more in you than you want to admit. She shook her head every time the words echoed inside her. She didn't want more. She wanted simple. Simple was safe. In the afternoon, she went to clean the living room. The piano sat in its familiar spot, shining under the soft light. She walked past it quickly, trying not to look at it. But something tugged at her, and she paused. Her eyes drifted toward the keys. She swallowed. She wasn't supposed to play. She wasn't supposed to touch it unless she was cleaning. But the room was quiet, and the house felt almost asleep. She moved closer, her steps small and careful. She reached out and touched the edge of the piano lightly. Her fingers traced the wood, and she felt a heavy ache in her chest. She remembered her old teacher's voice. Music is a language of the heart. Don't force it, feel it. She sat down slowly, almost without meaning to. Her hands hovered over the keys again. She didn't press anything. She didn't play. She just breathed. She told herself she wouldn't play. She just needed a moment to sit. A moment to settle the storm inside her. But the storm didn't settle. She pressed one key. It made the same soft sound as the night before. And that sound pulled her deeper into memory. She pressed another, and another. Soon her hands moved on their own. Not a real melody, not something she had practiced. Just scattered notes that drifted into the air like questions with no answers. She didn't hear footsteps. Entering the room, she didn't. No, anyone was watching. But Alistair stood, near the doorway, silent. Observing. At first, he didn't interrupt. He watched as she gently explored the keys, her expression soft and lost in thought. This was different from last night. She wasn't being forced. She wasn't being watched, at least she thought she wasn't. And her hands, though still hesitant, looked far more natural. There it is, he thought. That's what I heard beneath the surface. He stepped forward, and she jerked in surprise when she finally noticed his presence. She stood up instantly. "I'm sorry, sir," she said quickly. It's fine," he said. "You play better when you think no one is listening." Maria lowered her gaze. "I shouldn't have touched it." "You're allowed," he said. "You work here. And besides, I asked you to play again." "But not now," she whispered. He studied her carefully. "Why are you so afraid of this?" "I'm not afraid," she said, but her voice trembled. He raised an eyebrow, as if to say he didn't believe her. She didn't know how to explain the truth. She didn't want the piano to bring back old dreams. She didn't want to feel the hope she had pushed down for so long. Hope was dangerous. Hope hurt. "Maria," he said quietly, "if you ever want to talk about it—" "I don't," she interrupted softly. "Please, sir. I just want to work and go home." He nodded slowly, though the curiosity in his eyes didn't fade. "Fine," he said. "I won't push." But he wasn't done, not in his mind, not in his intentions, and she could feel it. She could sense that something was coming, something she couldn't control. As she left the room, she didn't look back, but the unfinished notes hung in the air behind her, echoing through the quiet. Part 4. From the moment Maria's fingers touched the keys in front of his guests, something in the mansion changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was almost sneaky, like a quiet breeze pushing open a window that had been shut for years. But everyone in that room felt it. Alistair felt it the most. After the guests left that night, murmuring among themselves about the maid who played like a professional, he remained standing beside the piano long after the room emptied. The lights had been dimmed by the staff, but he didn't move. His hand rested on the polished surface of the instrument, and his jaw stayed tight, like he was trying to hide a feeling he didn't want to admit he had. He kept hearing the music she played calm at first, then rising, warm and full, almost too mature for someone her age. It wasn't just skill. It was emotion. Real emotion. Something he hadn't heard in a long time, maybe ever. He wasn't used to being unsettled in his own home. Maria, meanwhile, kept her distance. She tidied up the tea glasses, folded the napkins, and gently wiped down the edges of the table. She didn't say a word about what had happened earlier, and she didn't look directly at him. She stayed focused, as if she wanted nothing more than to slip back into the background where she'd been before. But neither of them could pretend things were the same. The next morning, the staff moved quietly. They stole glances at Maria as she polished the hall mirror or carried towels down the stairs. Not because they were judging her, but because they had seen something they couldn't forget. The shy maid who avoided attention was suddenly the person everyone was curious about. Grace approached her near the laundry room with a small, worried smile. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. Maria nodded. "I'm fine." "You were amazing," Grace whispered, almost like she wasn't sure she was allowed to say it out loud. "People are going to talk about last night for days." Maria kept folding a towel. "I hope they forget by tomorrow." Grace frowned gently. "You know they won't." Before Maria could respond, Leonard called from across the hall. "He's asking for you." Maria froze. Her hands stopped moving. Grace and Leonard exchanged a look. Neither wanted to be the one to deliver that message. But someone had to. "He's in the music room," Leonard said. The words hung in the air like a warning. Maria placed the folded towel in the basket, smoothed her apron, and walked slowly toward the room she'd hoped to avoid forever. Alistair was sitting at the piano bench when she entered, not playing, not touching the keys, just sitting there with a stiff posture and a face she couldn't read. She stood near the doorway and lowered her head. "You asked for me, sir?" He didn't answer at first. He simply studied her, as if trying to see something he had missed before. Finally, he spoke. "Sit." She hesitated. "Sit," he repeated, but this time his voice carried less command and more uncertainty. It almost startled her. She sat in the nearest chair, folding her hands in her lap. Alistair leaned back slightly. "You played last night like someone who's trained." "Who taught you?" "My mother," she said softly. "And later, I learned at a community center. They had a music program." "And you stopped?" She nodded. "Why?" "I needed to work. My family needed help." He tapped his fingers against the side of the bench. A habit she had noticed before. He did it whenever he was thinking hard. "You shouldn't have stopped," he said. Maria lowered her gaze. "Sometimes life doesn't give you a choice." There was something about the quiet way she said it that struck him. Her voice wasn't bitter. It wasn't resentful. It was simply honest. For the first time in a long while, the truth made him uncomfortable. He stood abruptly, pushing the bench back with a soft scrape. "Play again." Maria looked up in surprise. "Right now?" "Yes. I want to hear what you can do without an audience watching." She swallowed, unsure. "I didn't come prepared to perform. I came because you asked for me." He motioned toward the piano. "Exactly. I asked. And you will play." Maria's chest tightened. She didn't want him to think she was refusing or being disrespectful. But she wasn't sure exposing her heart. Through music was something she wanted to do for someone who had tried to embarrass her just a day before. Still, saying no wasn't an option. She stood, walked toward the piano, and sat down. Her fingers hovered above the keys. But then she whispered something she hadn't planned to say. "Please don't judge me for it." Alistair blinked. Judge her? He was the one who felt judged last night, though no one had said a word. "I won't," he said quietly. Maria took a deep breath and began to play. This time, she didn't choose something classical or complicated. She chose a melody she had made up as a child, simple, sweet, and warm. A tune her mother used to hum when the house felt heavy and there wasn't enough money for rent or groceries. A tune she hadn't played for anyone in years. As the notes drifted through the room, the atmosphere softened. It didn't feel like a mansion anymore. It felt smaller, gentler, like a place where people could be human instead of perfect. Alistair listened without moving. He didn't blink much. Something about the music made him feel like he was being shown a part of Maria that words couldn't explain. When she finished, the room was so quiet that she wasn't sure if he was angry or disappointed. He stepped closer. That wasn't trained playing. Maria lowered her gaze again, worried. "That was real," he said. She looked up, confused. He cleared his throat, as if uncomfortable with his own honesty. "You play with feeling. That's rare." Maria clasped her hands together. "It's just something I do. It's not special." He shook his head. "It is." Those two words left her more unsettled than anything he had said before. She stood slowly. "May I return to my work now?" He hesitated before nodding. "Yes." She bowed her head slightly and walked out, her steps quiet, almost floating. But her mind was racing. Something had shifted again, and she didn't know whether to be grateful or afraid. Later that afternoon, Alistair sat alone in his office, staring at a report, but seeing none of the numbers. He tapped his pen against the edge of his desk. His mind kept drifting back to the moment she began to play. It wasn't just the music, it was the emotion behind it. Something raw, unpolished, honest. He wasn't used to honesty. He was used to people showing him only what they thought he wanted to see: polished conversations, polite compliments, surface-level talent. Nothing too vulnerable, nothing too real. But Maria didn't try to impress him. She just played, and because of that, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: humility. He hated it, but at the same time, he didn't. In the kitchen, the staff carefully avoided asking Maria what had happened in the music room. They sensed she wouldn't want to talk about it. Still, curiosity hung in the air like steam from a boiling pot. Finally, near the end of the day, Leonard cornered her gently while she was wiping down the counters. "Is everything all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Yes, he just wanted me to play again." Grace, who was kneading dough nearby, froze mid-movement. "He asked you to? Not in front of guests?" "No," Maria said. "It was just us." Grace exchanged a long look with Leonard. "That man never asks anyone to do anything twice," Leonard murmured. "If he wanted you to play again, that means he's thinking about something hard." Maria didn't respond. Grace rested one hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens, just stay true to yourself." Maria forced a small smile. "I'll try." But deep inside, she wasn't sure she could. Not when her world was changing without her permission. Not when the man she worked for, someone powerful, strict, and hard to read, was suddenly seeing her in a way she had never intended. And there was one more thing she feared. Once someone sees you differently, they never stop. That night, long after the staff went to their rooms and the house fell silent, Maria sat in her small corner space in the staff quarters. She hugged her knees and stared at her folded apron on the chair beside her. She didn't regret playing, but she did regret being noticed. She whispered to herself, "I shouldn't have touched that piano." Except she knew that wasn't true. She just didn't know what the truth was anymore, Dot, and in another part of the mansion. Alistair stood at his window, looking out at the dark garden, his hands behind his back. He whispered to himself, I misjudged her. He hated admitting it, but he couldn't deny it anymore. Something was starting. Something neither of them fully understood. And neither of them could stop. Part 5. The next few days in the mansion felt strangely quieter, even though nothing in the schedule had changed. Breakfast still happened at the same hour. The staff still moved through the hallways, as they always did, and Alistair still left for work each morning in his usual calm, polished manner. But beneath the surface, something unseen had shifted, and every person in the house could feel it. Maria felt it most of all. She tried to return to her old rhythm, wake early, tidy the guest rooms, wash the linens, polish the wood surfaces, and help Grace in the kitchen, but her mind wouldn't settle. Every time she passed the music room, she felt a small, nervous twist in her stomach. Every time her hand brushed a doorframe or a piece of furniture, she remembered the moment she had sat at the piano in front of Alistair, playing something so personal she had never intended for anyone to hear. The memory kept replaying, not the notes she played, but the way he had watched her, not with superiority or judgment, but with an expression she didn't recognize. It unsettled her. It softened something in her that she didn't want softened. She didn't understand it, and she didn't want to think about it, but she couldn't stop. One morning, while she was dusting the shelves in the living room, Grace came in with a tray of fresh pastries. The soft, sweet smell filled the air. "You're quiet today," Grace said gently. Maria kept dusting. "I'm just staying focused." Grace set the tray down. "Focused is one thing, but you're walking around like you're trying not to breathe too loudly." Maria paused, holding the cloth in her hand. "I don't want to draw attention." "You already have," Grace said with a warm, almost motherly look. "There's no hiding now." Maria's shoulders slumped a little. "I wish I could." Grace stepped closer. "Listen, you didn't do anything wrong. You played beautifully. That's all. If he looks at you differently now, that's his own journey, not yours." Maria forced a small smile. "I hope you're right." Grace returned the smile before heading toward the kitchen. "Just be yourself. People can't twist sincerity," Maria whispered to herself when Grace left. "But sincerity can still cause trouble." She continued cleaning, hoping the day would pass smoothly. Later that afternoon, Alistair returned home earlier than usual. The door opened, and the staff straightened automatically. Leonard greeted him, taking his coat. Maria, who happened to be nearby, quickly turned to carry a stack of folded blankets toward the stairs. But Alistair's voice caught her mid-step. "Maria." She froze. Her heartbeat jumped, and she slowly turned. He didn't look stern or impatient. He simply looked thoughtful. "I want to speak with you," he said. Grace, who was coming out of the kitchen, hid her concern behind a neutral expression. Leonard raised an eyebrow, but he said nothing. Maria nodded quietly and set the blankets down before following Alistair to his office. Her breathing felt uneven. She wished she had something to hold on to, but she kept her hands neatly folded. When he closed the office door behind them, the quiet was sharp. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. She sat carefully. He didn't sit right away. He paced slowly behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back, his mind clearly wrestling with something. Finally, he stopped and faced her. "I've been thinking," he said, "about your playing." Maria felt her pulse quicken. "If it upset you, I'm sorry." "I didn't mean—" "It didn't upset me," he interrupted. She blinked. "It surprised me," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "And it humbled me." That word again. Humbled. She didn't know how to respond. You have talent, he continued. Real talent. Not something learned from textbooks. Something you feel. Something people rarely have. Maria didn't speak. She looked down at her hands. Alistair moved to the front of the desk and leaned against it. Tell me something honestly. Do you want to play again? Not for me. Not for guests. For yourself. Maria swallowed. She wanted to say no. She wanted to say she didn't think about music anymore, that her life was about work and responsibility, not dreams or melodies. But lying never came naturally to her. I miss it, she admitted softly. Every day. Alistair nodded slowly. That's what I thought. He crossed his arms and studied her for a moment, as if deciding something. I want to make you an offer, he said. Maria stiffened. Offers from employers rarely meant anything good for people like her. You don't have to agree, he said, reading her concern. But I think you should hear it. She nodded. There is a music foundation I donate to. They offer part-time programs and evening classes for adults who want to return to music. No tuition. He paused. I can recommend you. They'll take you immediately. Maria's breath caught in her throat. You want me to study again? You should, he said simply. You have a gift that shouldn't stay hidden in a cleaning uniform. The words stung and soothed at the same time. But I can't, she whispered. I have work here. I have bills. I have a family to help. It won't interfere with your schedule, he said. Classes would be after your hours here. She shook her head. Even then, I don't think I can accept such a favor. He tilted his head. Why not? Because nothing in life is free, she replied. And I don't want to owe anyone anything. Alistair's expression softened for the first time since she had met him weeks ago. Almost like he understood exactly what she meant. You wouldn't owe me, he said quietly. It's not a debt. It's a bridge. One you should walk across if you want to. Her eyes grew warm, but she blinked quickly to hide it. I don't know, she whispered. He nodded. Then think about it. No pressure. He stood up straight and walked to the door, holding it open for her. You may return to your work, he said gently. She stood, thanked him softly, and stepped out of the office with her thoughts spinning like loose pages in the wind. When she reached the hallway, Grace was standing near the stairs, pretending to rearrange a vase, but clearly waiting for news. What happened? She asked the moment Maria was close enough. He wants me to study again, Maria said, still unsure how to feel. Grace's eyes widened. Study? Music? Maria nodded. He said he would recommend me to a program. Grace's jaw dropped. Well, that's unexpected. I don't know if it's a good idea, Maria murmured. Grace placed a comforting hand on her arm. It's a wonderful idea. You deserve it. But what if it changes things? Maria asked. What if it becomes complicated? Grace sighed softly. Life becomes complicated, no matter what you choose. At least choose the thing that feeds your heart. Maria looked to the side, her chest tightening. She had spent so long suppressing her dreams that she wasn't sure she knew how to open that part of herself again. I'll think about it, she whispered. Good, Grace said. That's all you need to do today? That night, in her small room, Maria sat on her bed, hugging her knees. She stared at the blank wall in front of her, imagining what it would feel like to sit in a real music class again. To learn, to grow, to play something not because she was asked to, but because she wanted to. She could almost hear the sound of a piano again, not the polished one in the mansion, but the old one from her childhood, the one with chipped paint and uneven keys. She remembered the warmth in her mother's voice when she used to say, "Music will always be there for you, even when people aren't." Tears rose quietly in her eyes. She wiped them quickly and whispered, "I don't know if I'm ready." In another part of the house, Alistair sat in the dark of his study, staring at the piano in the corner. He wondered if he had crossed a line, or if he had finally done something right for once. He didn't know either, but something was clear. Maria's music had stirred something inside him that he couldn't ignore, and he had no idea where it would lead. Not yet, but soon. Part 6 content will be generated here. The restaurant lights had softened as the last few customers prepared to leave, leaving behind gentle echoes of conversation and the clinking of dishes being cleaned in the kitchen. She wiped down a table slowly, almost carefully, as if her mind was somewhere else entirely. In truth, it was. Her heart had not settled since she sat at the piano earlier that night. The memory of the keys beneath her fingers still lingered like a warm imprint she could feel even as she worked. The applause echoed in her thoughts again. She had never performed like that in front of so many eyes, nor had she expected the reaction. It didn't feel real, but it was. Every sound, every compliment, every breath of silence while she played. It had all happened. When she finished cleaning her last table, she leaned against the counter and let her shoulders relax. The dishwasher came out from the kitchen, drying his hands on a towel. He gave her that same warm smile he'd always given her, but tonight it carried something extra. "You look lighter," he said. "Do I?" she asked with a small laugh. He nodded. "Like someone just took a big weight off your shoulders." She paused, thinking about it. "Maybe someone did," she said softly. He nodded again, this time without speaking, as if words weren't needed. Then he slowly walked away to finish his tasks, leaving her alone with her thoughts again. Her manager approached, checking the last receipts before locking them in the drawer. He looked tired but satisfied, the kind of tired that came from a long night that ended better than expected. "You saved us tonight," he said without looking up. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." She shook her head gently. "I just helped." "No," he replied, glancing up at her. "You did more than that. You changed the whole night. You changed the whole room." She didn't know what to say, so she simply gave a small smile. Compliments still felt like new shoes. Nice, but a little hard to walk in. Before they closed, the manager headed toward his office, leaving her to finish rolling silverware. She wrapped forks and knives into folded napkins, but her hands moved slowly. Every few seconds she glanced toward the piano again. It sat quietly under the dim lights, almost peaceful now. She wondered how she ever convinced herself she wasn't allowed to touch it. How she convinced herself she didn't deserve to play anymore. The piano didn't judge her. It never had. It had waited, silently, until she was ready again. She walked toward it, drawn in by something gentle. She stood near the bench for a moment, her fingers brushing against the smooth wood. She didn't sit, didn't open the cover, didn't press any keys. She simply stood there, breathing in the moment. The dishwasher peeked out from the kitchen once more. He watched her quietly, almost proudly. "Don't wait so long next time," he said. She turned, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" "You let your gift sit alone for too long," he said. "It deserves light." "So do you." Her eyes softened. She didn't know what she had done to deserve someone like him in her corner, but she was grateful. When the staff finally clocked out, she stepped outside into the night air. It was cool and refreshing, rushing against her skin like a soft reminder that the world was still moving, still open, still full of possibilities she never allowed herself to see. The street was quiet. A few cars passed by, headlights glowing softly. She walked slowly across the parking lot, her mind drifting through the events of the evening like scenes from someone else's life. People had listened to her. People had applauded her. Someone who taught music had even offered to help her pursue it again. She took a slow breath and felt something shift. Inside her, a small but powerful sense of hope. When she reached the bus stop, she sat on the bench and looked down at the card the music teacher had given her earlier. She had forgotten she still had it in her apron pocket. She ran her thumb over the printed letters. Could she really call? Could she really step back into that world? The world she once loved but left behind because life had piled up too many responsibilities, too many bills, too many reasons to push her dreams aside. She looked up at the night sky, dark but dotted with faint stars. Maybe, she whispered to herself. The bus arrived with its usual rumbling sound. She climbed on, paid her fare, and sat near the window. As the city lights moved outside, she leaned her head gently against the glass and thought about the feeling she had when she played. The calmness, the certainty, the strange mix of being vulnerable and powerful at the same time. She wanted that feeling. Again, she needed it by the time the bus reached her stop. She had made up her mind about at least one thing. She wouldn't let the piano go quiet inside her again. The next morning, sunlight peeked through her curtains. She sat up slowly, her mind still swirling with everything that happened. It felt strange to wake up and remember that the night before wasn't a dream. After breakfast, she sat at the edge of her small kitchen table and pulled out the card again. She stared at the number. Her hands trembled a little, not from fear, but from the weight of the moment. She took a breath and dialed. The line rang once, twice. Then a warm voice answered, "Hello?" She hesitated. "Hi. This is the waitress from last night." "Oh," the man said, sounding delighted. "I'm so glad you called. I just wanted to ask," she said carefully, "if the offer still stands. About lessons or guidance." "It absolutely does," he said. "Whenever you're ready. We can work around your schedule. You don't have to know what you want yet. You just have to take the first step." She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Okay," she said softly. "I'd like that." They talked for a few minutes, agreeing to meet later in the week. When she hung up, a wave of relief and excitement washed over her. She felt like she had opened a door she had forgotten existed. Later that same week, when she arrived at work, the staff greeted her with more warmth than usual. Someone had placed a small note on the bulletin board that read, "Wonderful performance. You made last night unforgettable." She didn't know who wrote it, but it made her smile. The manager pulled her aside. "If you want, you can play again this weekend," he said. "No pressure. But customers keep asking." She blinked, surprised. "Really?" "Really," he said. "People talked about you all night online. Someone posted a short video. It's getting shared." She felt her heart skip. "What?" He nodded. "In a good way," he added quickly. "People loved it." Her chest warmed with disbelief. "I'll think about it," she said. "Take your time." He replied. As she moved through her shift, she noticed something else. Customers who had been there the night she played smiled at her when she passed their tables. Some even whispered things like, "That's her," or "She's the one." It wasn't the kind of attention that made her uncomfortable. It was gentle, appreciative. By the end of the night, she found herself staring at the piano again. The same warm light shined on it. The same quiet energy surrounded it. This time, she didn't hesitate. When the restaurant slowed down, she sat at the bench and lifted the cover. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Calm this time, steady. She played a soft tune. Not a full performance, not anything planned, just a simple melody that felt like breathing. Her coworkers paused to listen. No one interrupted. No one asked why she was playing. They just let her be in the moment. When she finished, the dishwasher clapped once from the kitchen doorway. "There she is," he said. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "I'm trying," she said. "You're doing more than trying." Weeks passed, and she continued to play at the restaurant during slow hours. Sometimes customers gathered to listen. Sometimes she practiced alone after closing. And every week, her confidence grew. She began lessons with the music teacher, rediscovering parts of her talent she thought she'd lost. He told her she had something rare, not just skill, but heart. She worked her serving shifts with more happiness, more energy. She found balance between her job and her music, something she once believed was impossible. As for the wealthy man who mocked her that night, she never saw him again. She didn't need to. His opinion had never been her measure. She had learned her worth in a much brighter way. Months later, she performed her first small recital at a community event. Nothing huge, nothing intimidating, just a small gathering of people who loved music. When she finished, the applause she received felt just as warm as the applause from the restaurant that unforgettable night. When she stepped off the stage, she remembered the night she sat at the piano in her work apron, hands trembling, heart unsure, as she realized that everything changed because she chose to try. She didn't chase fame. She didn't try to prove anything to anyone. She simply allowed her hidden talent to breathe again, and that was enough to change her life. She became someone who believed in herself again, someone who understood that dreams don't disappear. They wait. And when she finally walked home after her recital, under a sky full of soft stars, she whispered one quiet promise to herself: "I won't hide anymore.